The original question asked by Turing and many other people, that is, whether we can build a computer system which is comparable to the human mind in general. And that is, to me, is still the question I want to try to answer. I know it's difficult. I know everyone else before me have failed. But I think this is a valuable scientific question that needs to be answered. And I believe I have some idea, no one have tried. So I want to give it a try. I will say we have already made very great progress in AGI research, even though it's not well known to the outside. Okay. Or to put it in an extreme form, I will say we have already achieved the basics.
Thank you for joining Change I Am Possible, which is India's first future tech podcast. And today I'm super delighted to have with me Dr. Pei Wang, who has been working on non-axiomatic reasoning system. He's also the chief executive editor for Journal of Artificial General Intelligence and currently the associate professor of instruction in computer and information, College of Science and Technology at the Temple University. It's a pleasure and honor to speaking to you. Really appreciate you giving time and being part of the conversation. So artificial intelligence, it was a term which was coined, I think, back in mid-1955 with Marvin Minsky and John McCarthy. And we thought that would be it. But over the years, there's various subsets of artificial intelligence like deep learning, machine learning, and then there's NLP, and there's so on and so forth, And then now there is this new term which has become a little bit more confusing, though it's kind of trying to create a description of what it is and what it could be in the future, but for the lay people, it's a little confusing. So could you start by describing what artificial narrow intelligence is, what artificial general intelligence could be, and what could be what is now defined as the artificial superintelligence?
Okay, thanks at least first for the introduction, then for the question. This is should be indeed the first question to be discussed. Because everything else depends on it. Of course, what I said is my personal opinion. Some other people may have a different opinion. But as far as I can tell, the story is something just like what you said. At the beginning, it was the term artificial intelligence that was introduced. But I think the word is not very important. What really important is the idea behind this word. No matter what you call it, this is the idea that as soon as today's modern digital computer was invented, initially, of course, for numerical calculation, but pretty soon people realize that it can do much more than that. They can actually take over a lot of our intellectual labors. So people begin to say, okay, traditional industry is doing our physical labor, and this computer industry is taking over our intellectual or mental capability. Then naturally the question raised, that is whether it can do everything a human mind can do. To me, that is the idea of artificial intelligence. Whether you use this term or you call it something else, it's the same idea. Okay, the name doesn't really matter that much. So at the very beginning, this AI field is very clear, even before the phrase artificial intelligence was introduced in the Dartmouth meeting. You can well-known paper by Alan Turing talking about the machine, thinking machine. Again, it's the same idea. So at that time, a bunch of people begin to explore the possibility. And at the very beginning, they're very optimistic. Also, they made a lot of very remarkable, impressive progress by doing this and that. Previously only the human mind can do it. Then people become, make predictions, say that in 20 years, we can do whatever the human mind can do and so on. Clearly, it didn't happen. Not only that, all the major projects directly target this goal, failed, all of them, all over the world. Okay, some people may still remember the so-called fifth generation computer system of Japan in the late 80s. That also was a big project coordinated by several companies and the government and so on. They tried to build something which caused a breakthrough in AI, which, according to most people's opinion, it failed. Okay, they produced something, but it's far from what they expected. So, because of all these failures in the mainstream artificial intelligence field, the common consensus become this is either impossible or too far away from the reality. Maybe possible after 200 years. Some people say it's completely impossible because of this or that reason. So in kind of like in the 80s, even earlier than that, the whole field began to tend to a different direction. That is, they are focusing on problem-specific solutions and domain-specific techniques. Clearly, that's the case. Some people never mention it, but they drop the dream of a thinking machine. So that's the big picture, and that's what happened until today. But of course, as always, there are some people who don't like this idea, okay, which include me. So we are not saying that the current AI work is not valuable. I have very high respect to what they have done. This is very valuable from both a theoretical and a practical point of view. The original problem of the thinking machine is still there. The original question asked by Turing and many other people, that is, whether we can build a computer system which is comparable to the human mind in general. And that is, to me, is still the question I want to try to answer. I know it's difficult. I know everyone else before me have failed. But I think this is a valuable scientific question that need to be answered. And I believe I have some idea. No one have tried. So I want to give it a try.
Lovely, lovely. Wish you the very best, Dr. Pei. And I guess over the years, some of the brightest minds have poked at this question of figuring if we could create a machine which could have general intelligence. Yes, you also mentioned that over the years, people have failed miserably at it. Their predictions have fallen flat, but there has been progress. And somehow we are taking these building blocks of our understanding of how a human brain functions. And maybe in the next few decades, we could kind of put all those Lego blocks together, and maybe it could be as emergent as a child understands or becomes conscious of its surrounding. But these are deep questions, and I guess, I mean, there are very few brave people such as yourself who are poking at this, maybe what some might call impossible. But impossible is a term which, even if you break it down, it spells I am possible, and it takes human ingenuity and curiosity and persistence, and somehow we have managed to solve some of the biggest problems. And I feel that if we manage to solve this problem, if we kind of figure out a thinking machine, I think the world could be completely transformed. For the better or the worse, that's completely debatable. Today, in the current narrow intelligence has grown phenomenally. We have some great research work, as well as companies such as OpenAI, DeepMind, building some fantastic architectures, which even at its narrow space has kind of left some of the best minds behind, whether it's the game of chess, game of Go, and so on and so forth. Today, we have something called as GPT-3 and NLP, which is doing really, really good. We also have the DeepMind's AlphaFold 2 and Mu0 and so many other works. So what are the current research work or understanding of even the narrow space of intelligence which excites you the most?
So let's go back to the previous unfinished story about AGI. Right? So I mentioned I'm the one that is still trying to pursue the original dream of artificial intelligence. Clearly, I'm not alone. Even though it's a very small minority, I'm not the only one. So it's about 20 years ago. I think it's 18 or 17 years ago. Some of us work together, try to publish a collection of articles describe this type of work. Okay. Then after some comparison, we pick the phrase of artificial general intelligence as the title. Actually, we should keep the phrase of artificial intelligence because it was not what that means, but it's not the current meaning of the phrase. So we need a new name for an old idea. Okay, that's why this AGI name was used. Why a major force behind this movement is what you just said, is the great progress of deep learning in recent years. Okay. But on the other hand, there is an interesting thing that I guess outside people may find it's hard to believe. Most of the AGI researchers, including myself, do not do deep learning. Furthermore, we do not believe deep learning is the technology that gave us AGI. Okay. Even though some people in the deep learning group, they believe they are the one who is going to bring AGI to the future, okay, or to the human society. Actually, some colleagues directly tell me this is pseudoscience, okay? You're not supposed to do that. That's impossible. That's just a whole bunch of hype, okay? You kind of like promise something you cannot deliver. This is not even a scientific concept. So that's 20 years ago. Now, there are still people who think that way. But most of the people now believe AGI, even still pretty difficult, that's clear. Some people even say it's still impossible. But at least now it's accepted as a valid topic to discuss in the scientific community. Instead of talking about technology, there are many of them. I'm going to talk about the general strategy. What you just said is very intuitive, that's very attractive. That's what I call the first strategy, that's called a hybrid approach. The intuitive idea is just to base our work on the progress so far of the whole AI community, then pick the most powerful technique in each domain. For example, you mentioned the progress in natural language. Some people have witnessed the progress in robotics, and there is some very amazing work. And Wason, natural language understanding in terms of translation, speech into text, great success. Okay, so it's very natural to think, oh, if that's the case, why not just put those things together? Right? So if you have a piece of software which will allow you to understand human language, then you have another piece of knowledge which will allow you to learn from human knowledge, then why not? If you can beat the world champion in Go, which is clearly a very, very difficult task, why you cannot do everything else? which mostly people will feel that at least it's easier than Go, right? If you can even do that, why not? So that's the first approach. But I can tell you, most of AGI researchers don't believe it's possible. So if you take this approach, you'll see that when you build a different room, you're still going to use the technology out there on the market, right? You still need, say, to handle human language, you still need to have vision, you still need to move yourself, which is robotics. But this is already very different from the traditional way. Because in the traditional way, you don't think about anything else. You just focus on the task.
Right. So you are saying that the current progress of AI community, and if we take all of those work together, we will not be able to solve general intelligence. But if you see in nature, at least ants, honeybees are a fantastic example of cooperation and
Yes.
building intelligence over there. You also mentioned that deep learning could not be the framework, with a general consensus between some of the top AI researchers. What, according to you, through your research work, have you figured could be the possible architecture or framework of a thinking machine?
My approach belongs to the unified school, where I believe what we call intelligence is identified by some kind of general principle, which not only is shown by the human mind, but can also be used to construct computer system, which also show this property. To be specific, you'll see here, I have a detailed abstract talking about my theory of intelligence, as well as its different forms. To be specific, my opinion about intelligence is the ability for a system to adapt to its environment, as well as to work with insufficient knowledge and resources. By insufficient knowledge and resources basically means that there is always something the system does not know, and also the system does not have the time to explore all possibility. I believe the human mind generally works in this environment, and that's also what we hope a computer system or intelligent computer system to work into. Okay, so I'm developing a new system called, well, it's not really new. I have been working on this for decades, but this is new in a sense when you compare it with other better known AI technology. Okay. I call it non-axiomatic reasoning system. So here is the introduction. In this interview, I'm not going to talk about the technical details, but interested people can see my introduction. And I have about 100 publications in my website. They all can be downloaded. And this is also not just a theory. It's also implemented already in many versions. So you can, currently it's an open source project. I'm working with a group of developers on this project, which you can download the current version and you can try it. You can see what it can do. And also recently we have begun to try concrete practical applications, but this is still at a very early stage. Okay. Anyway, all the information you want to know can be found here. So then it go back to your question. If we go with this architecture approach, I belong to the third group. I said the first one is a hybrid, put everything together. The second one is integrated. So you get an architecture, then you put everything together. For my approach, I call it a unified approach. That is to looking for a uniform foundation, or in other words, I want to get a theory of intelligence first. I want to answer the question, what is intelligence? I will provide a foundation for me to develop a new technology according to this definition, which uniformly solve all those problems. I do not even say, yeah, we have a blueprint, then you build, we kind of like build several rooms in parallel. No, I don't do it that way. Build one single foundation, not several pieces of foundation put together. Then I will build the first floor, or you call it ground floor, whatever. Then I build the second floor on top of the first floor. Then the third floor on top of that. Okay, you see the difference between this one and the previous approach is fundamentally I'm using one technology, not multiple technology. And also the architecture itself, there is nothing fancy. I'm just begin to gradually add more functionality into the architecture rather than to say, okay, whether you have a concrete example, learning and reasoning. I already mentioned that. They are clearly the major functions of any intelligence system. If you do hybrid approach, you are going to go to find the best or the most successful learning technique and the most successful reasoning technique, then you connect them together, roughly speaking. If you go with the integrated approach, you are more careful. You're going to have an overall architecture first. Then you find a reasoning module and a learning module that can work together. Each of them doesn't have to be the most successful one on the market, but they must work together. In my approach, there is no separate reasoning and learning module. It's the same module which does both. If you study it from one side, you see, yeah, that's learning. If you see it from the other side, what you see is reasoning. There is no separate technique. Roughly speaking, that's the difference. I think this is clear enough.
Thank you for sharing the insights, Doctor. So you said that you are working on a unified approach or a theory of intelligence first to kind of then stack it with the functionalities onto the architecture. Unlike the other players, there is like Richard Sutton who's working on a reinforcement learning to kind of figure architecture to kind of figure out maybe that could lead to AGI. Are there any other researchers or companies' work that you think are on the right approach, or at least asking the right questions when in building an intelligent machine?
This is a difficult question because currently in the AGI community, there's still many different approach. Okay, which I will point to this page also in my website. Here I have an introduction about the current AGI field, which include my own approach as well as some other people's approach. Okay, where I list about 10 of them altogether, representative ones, but there are also, of course, many others. And also I compare them using some simple standard. Also here I list all the literatures and resources I think are necessary. So you can see that in the current AGI community, we have very roughly the same goal. We want to build something which is more like the original goal of AI. But the concrete approach are very different from each other. We're using many different techniques in the development. So if you ask me what I should learn, well, I completely depend on which approach you will take, or which one you think is more reasonable or promising. First, my website can be accessed using this URL, or you can just Google my name and then follow the link to my website at Temple University. At my website, just for those students, I say that's my recommendation. Roughly speaking, I will say this is a multidisciplinary research. Okay, computer science by itself is clearly not enough. You know enough about computer, but you don't know enough about the mind. So you need to learn how the mind works. But the tricky part is, at the same time, AI should not try to duplicate the human brain as faithful as possible. Again, I will answer it with a common metaphor, that is, an airplane does not fly exactly like a bird, right? That's the most used metaphor in this debate. Yeah, we learn a lot from the human brain, including myself. We get inspiration from it, but it doesn't mean we have to duplicate it as faithful as possible to get a thinking machine, because a computer, after all, is not a biological system. Okay, you don't need a pure biological functionality to make it work. But clearly to separate the biological necessity and the cognitive necessity is very, very tricky and very difficult. But on the other hand, I think most people agree there is such a distinction. That's a short answer why I do not simulate the human brain in detail. What I want to simulate is the human mind. My goal of research is not to build a computer which pretend to be a human or pass the Turing test. I have high respect to Turing, but I do not think, even Turing himself does not really propose his test as a sufficient and necessary condition for intelligence. He proposed it as a sufficient condition. He made it very clear it's not a necessary condition, meaning that it can be intelligent, but it doesn't have to behave like a human. Okay. Right. For example, my system is not going to have human experience. That's not a technical issue. Because of that, it's going to it will have no way to get something, only can be obtained from human experience. But on the other hand, it has its own experience, like the experience of a robot, which we don't have. Intelligence is a generalization of human intelligence. Human intelligence is a special case of intelligence in general. That's actually shared by a lot of AI research. Okay, it doesn't have to behave exactly like a human.
You mentioned that maybe understanding the human brain could not be the path towards building a thinking machine. Now, what functionalities you think which you are looking to add into the architecture would create a thinking machine? Would we require embodiment? Do you think consciousness, understanding that, would play a role towards building an intelligent machine?
Yes, of course. But that's not where I want to start. To me, consciousness is, say, the 8th or the 9th floor. You don't want to start from there, even though that's probably the most visible one from the outside. Okay, that's the most remarkable, level. But I will start from the foundation. Then I will do the first, second, third, until I reach the level of consciousness. So according to my definition of intelligence, consciousness is not a necessary function for intelligent system, but is a necessary function of high intelligence system. So again, to me, intelligence is a matter of degree. And to me, consciousness is at the kind of like top level.
Right, right. What are your views on these people who are working on neuromorphic computing or also actually looking at quantum computing? Do you think that could be possibly the ways into probing AGI?
It will give us some inspiration, that's for sure. We want to know how the brain works. And also, they are going to produce a lot of very great contribution to the study of brain, which of course is also crucial for scientific research. Okay, but to me, that's not the best way to reach AGI because, as I said, it include too many unnecessary or irrelevant factors from the brain. Here, I can only mention a couple of things. First, clearly, we are fully aware of this issue. It's not saying that we're just a whole bunch of mad scientists who just want to have fun and don't care about the consequence. That's clearly not true. And here, I also mentioned some meetings and some materials about it. Second, the conclusion is a complicated issue. Okay. First, I think I, as well as many other people in the field, all agree this thing can be dangerous. Okay, I'm not saying what we are doing is always good for the human being or will never be misused or abused to cause trouble. That's clearly not true. Not only for AGI, it's actually the case for every technology, especially major technical breakthroughs. Okay, there is always a danger, so we're aware of that. On the other hand, I and many other people who are still working in the field do not agree this is necessarily bad or AGI will take over the world or something like that. Okay, all that kind of thing. Yeah, you can watch it, movie, and think about it, that's okay. But we haven't found any convincing argument which indicate, this is necessarily will lead to a disaster. That's not the case. As I said, every technology will produce something good and also produce something bad. As far as we can tell at the moment, we still believe AGI will produce much more good results than bad results.
When do you think we will have AGI? And what would you want to leave the audience thinking about the world when we have like a thinking machine?
The first question is related to what I said. To me, intelligence is a matter of degree. So we are not going to have an event. Say that after that event is achieved, we say, oh, now we have AGI. But before that day, we don't have it. It's not a binary situation. Okay, it's a gradual accumulation of work. So I will say we have already made very great progress in AGI research, even though it's not well known to the outside world. Okay. Or to put it in an extreme situation form, I will say we have already achieved the basic. But on the other hand, what you said is true. That is the public impression. Okay, that's typically triggered by some news event like this AlphaGo success in Go, and then all of a sudden people say, "Oh, human level intelligence is here." So there is a milestone. I don't believe that's the case. So usually I don't answer the question that when we have AGI, because if you are talking about inside, I think we have already solved some of the most difficult questions. Of course, we're clearly far from finish this whole building. Okay, I think we get the foundation right. We get the first couple of floors right, but it's still invisible to the outside world. If you're talking about when we can create an event to the public so that people say, oh, certainly there is a building already there. I have no idea. This is not an academic topic. That's also related to many things like, media and social impression and people's expectation and so on. I don't know. That's actually also that's not too important for my research. We just continue to build on this construction.
Right. What excites you the most about AGI?
For first thing, actually, I'm not motivated by application purpose. Many people want to build AGI because they want a computer system to solve this problem, solve that problem. And some people even say this will solve all problems for us because, it's a thinking machine. My primary motivation until today is still, I'm just curious how this thinking thing works. So you say you know how it works. Okay, build one. Okay, so we can use this platform to actually test all theory about thinking, about mind. But my major motivation is still to figure out, this is also something philosophers said thousands of years ago, that is to know yourself. To know ourselves include to know our body and our mind. I want to know our mind, how it works.
Beautiful.
And AGI gave me the best way to actually do it, rather than produce a whole bunch of theory which seems to have solved all the problems, but still it seems that nothing. If you don't have a working system, if you don't have program, if you just have a theory about intelligence, no one takes you serious.
Right. Thank you, Doctor. Really appreciate you sharing your insights. And I can feel the passion, because for you, it is about more than building an application. I think it's you are laying the building blocks. The deepest question that mankind has faced, what would happen if we create a subset or an intelligent machine? I am super excited about that world, because there are people like you who are approaching this grand problem. I think if and when we try and have an answer of what actually what intelligence is, what consciousness is, and we are able to compute it or be able to build an intelligent machine, I think the world will become a very, very great place to live in. So I wish you the very best, and I wish you lots of success. And I would love to possibly have a conversation maybe later on to see where your research work is going. Really appreciate you giving the time to sharing your insights. And to my listeners, if you like what you see and hear, please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.